Our argument will be that space is not real. It's not real. Science, technology, it's all fake. It's a projection of white fantasies that has worked to control our interpretation of how the world works. None of us have had the privilege of going to fucking space to verify that there's these stars and these galaxies and these planets and things like that. Does that make sense? And so it's a huge criticism of modernity, it's a huge criticism of science, it's a huge criticism of even academia and argument structure within and of itself.
Yes, you heard that correctly. That was my professor trying to argue that science is fake, made up by white people to control the world, and that outer space doesn't actually exist. Now, this was one of many anti-white, anti-academic statements that I recorded while in the class and that you're going to hear in this video. Now, some of you might already know me from the incident last January where I was in a debate round and was told that my arguments were invalid because I'm white. And then I was disqualified for quoting white supremacists like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. And I said afterwards that incidents like those are part of a bigger problem that's coming from higher up in academia, specifically professors pushing identity politics, victim mentality, and hyper-deconstructionism onto their students. Attending university this year and joining the debate team has only confirmed that. For some context, the debate topic this year for college is whether or not the United States should work together with China or Russia in going to space, whether that's space exploration, putting solar panels in space, putting regulations on weapons in space. There's 6 topic areas that they can work together in. But instead of talking about those, what my professor and classmates want to argue is that space doesn't exist, it's made up by white people. We should get rid of all white people because they're inherently racist, colonialistic, and capitalistic, and just round them all up against their will, put them in a rocket ship, and just send them away. Now, when I tried to question this and point out how wrong this was, the professor instructed the black students not to take questions from me because I'm white. There's also the argument that putting regulations in space is equivalent to rape, and if you disagree with that statement, you're also sexually assaulting me with words. Now, luckily, I recorded all of this, so you don't have to take my word for any of it. But obviously, for the sake of accessibility and time, I can't include all of it in this video. But it'll be in the description if you want to make sure I'm not taking anything out of context. Now, let's get back to the claim that space doesn't exist.
Imagine someone who grew up inner city Kansas City, for instance, who never left a 20-block radius. They can't even fathom that there's mountains in the world, let alone that there's something outside of that. Does that make sense, right? And so structural inequity, to some degree, because of our lack of privilege in terms of mobility, determines what we can understand to be real and falsifiable. Whiteness then works and then appropriates science and technology to say this is true while this is not true because it's not verifiable. Does that make sense? And so it's an argument to say that we should focus, it's a hyper focus on the experiential for those of who does not capitulate with whiteness. Yes.
So, like, what about like telescopes or black astronauts who have been to space?
What black astronaut went to space?
There's been like 14. If you just Google black astronauts, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's astronauts. Not every astronaut goes to space.
Yeah. So if you go to the Wikipedia, there's 14 that went to space, and then there's a whole lot.
You just use it in an academic space and you just cited Wikipedia?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure they have other sources, but like if you look up the identity of these people, okay. So like Gu and Stuart Blueforth.
They said space was real?
Well, he went to space.
Did he say it was real?
I'm sure I could find an interview of him talking about his experience. I don't know where he went if it didn't exist.
Good, then that means we have competing perspectives about truth, which means you should vote negative on presumption because...
Because why?
You can't verify anything.
But he can verify it because he went there.
Okay, I can verify that it's not real because I haven't. So
you can verify
negative on presumption.
You can verify that space isn't real because you haven't been there.
Yeah, there's no evidence that it exists. My life is evidence of the fact that space does not exist.
So the only type of evidence that's accessible to you is your direct experience?
Absolutely.
Do you experience other people? Do you experience other people's accounts of their experience?
No.
So if a black guy...
I just experience them accounting their accounts, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't reserve a healthy amount of skepticism.
I mean, they could be lying, yeah.
Oh, so you're saying that I'm lying too?
No,
Or are you saying Wikipedia's lying?
No, I'm saying he could be lying.
Astronauts
like the black astronauts could be lying, that's true.
Correct.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, but
And just because they're black doesn't mean that they don't participate in whiteness.
what do you mean?
Okay, we can have more reading about this, but whiteness is not a racial concept that is about the epidermal. It's more so about a particular set of ideologies that works to securitize life for white people, and black people
Yeah.
are definitely participants in that.
I'm not denying that black people
Okay.
engage. I'm saying the claim that space does not exist because you haven't seen it.
Correct.
Like that's like saying like Paris doesn't exist because I've never been there.
Correct.
Okay. So I can't use other people's experiences as proof that it probably does exist?
And that's what we call colonialism.
What?
Because you are using other people's experience. I don't even know what that verbiage means. What does it mean to
Like trust?
What does it mean to extract someone's experience and use it for justification for your own political
Okay,
agenda?
well it's like, how do I know that slavery happened if I didn't see it, right? Because we have history. Can I just say slavery never happened?
It's called post-traumatic slave disorder.
Yeah. Well, I've never experienced that, so
Awesome.
it doesn't exist
Great.
then?
You can say that it didn't. I mean, a lot of your people say that it didn't. So
Right. Yeah,
It's
and
not
it's
anything
like-
new. It's not anything contrary.
Yeah.
My argument is that black people should have an inroad into that experiential because white people's experience determines the rest of the world. That's just the uniqueness argument.
Yeah,
of
but
the
it's
affirmative.
not just white people. There's black people who have experiences going to space. There's like
Correct.
Neil deGrasse Tyson who
Whiteness
talks
as a
about.
structure definitely rules the world. That's our uniqueness argument. The AF would blacken our understanding of that by reserving the option that those things are unreal and are used as myths to securitize other people's.
So are they like being hypnotized, like the black people? Are they like being brainwashed by whiteness to think they're in space, or? I guess I'm just
I
not
think
understanding.
everybody's brainwashed by whiteness.
I'm just not really understanding like how whiteness relates to the existence of space.
I mean, I don't think you've done much reading about whiteness.
I guess I don't understand exactly.
Yeah, that's why we'll do some reading
Yeah.
in regard to it.
Okay.
Sweet. Any other questions?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. First is the backwards reasoning that the professor engages in when he talks about presumption, specifically the idea that lack of evidence for space is evidence that space does not exist. That's like saying that lack of proof for God is proof that God does not exist. It's not. It's just lack of proof for God. God could still exist. In the same way that lack of proof for guilt doesn't mean that the person is innocent. They could still be guilty. It's just that we assume innocence because we don't have evidence to conclude otherwise. But in this case, there is evidence. There are black astronauts. There are astronomers like Neil deGrasse Tyson who study it. But for some reason, my professor is advocating for this type of Afro-solipsism, in which the only thing he can believe in is his own direct experience. This, of course, collapses in the same way that all forms of solipsism collapses, which is that if you start with belief in the mind, and you say that you are going to trust your mind and nothing else, then it logically follows that you should believe in the external world, which is outside of your mind, because your mind tells you to. For example, your mind, through sensory inputs and cognitive reasoning, tells you that there is a table in front of you. And if you really trust your mind, you'll believe that. Sure, you should reserve a healthy amount of skepticism, but there's no reason to believe that the astronauts are lying in this instance. If someone gives you an account of their experience and your mind tells you that it's reasonable, you should trust it. But then, of course, my professor says that this is colonialism because you are extracting their experiences and using it for your own. You're colonizing them. My professor does this a lot. What he'll do is he'll take a word, which doesn't mean at all the way in which he's trying to use it, but will, through a series of sophistical non sequiturs, arrive at the conclusion that the word applies, whether it's racism, sexism, colonialism, or sexual assault. This next clip is a perfect example of this.
I'm interested in this. If any of you all are interested in this, I want to hear your AF ideas before I get to talking about my AF ideas. But space, as included in the topic, really, I mean, I think the topic areas help to understand what the topic meant when it said national space policy. But I think space is something that is not just specific to outside our stratosphere, but also kind of how we address people interpersonally, the difference between public and intimate forms of speech, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm getting at is arguments in regard to consent and about whether or not one can encroach upon the body. For instance, how can you have the United States federal government cooperate with another entity for space policy? Should anyone be able to cooperate or have influence on your space, for instance? And so it could be argued that the topic is really rapey if we understand space differently, because it will require external influence on how you move throughout space. Because space is not just this thing outside of our stratosphere, but it's rather something that we all occupy.
Couldn't you argue that the terms in the topic, like space-based, deep space, like these are terms, and because the topic uses those specific terms?
All of those things can be interpreted differently. Arms control of space weapons. Why isn't that like Title IX?
Yeah, I mean, that one you could, but like the other one, like deep space exploration or space-based
Deep
type.
space exploration.
Yeah.
Joint human spaceflight. So, excuse my French, but now we're talking about like gangbangs.
Okay, I mean,
I'm
I
just letting you
don't
know,
see the connection
like,
between
these
that.
Things can be interpreted in different ways. And part and
Yeah,
parcel
I guess
of
I'm
it-
asking, like, how do you win the interpretation?
I mean, you could just have a debate with them about competing interpretations,
Okay.
definitional basis. But just that is not going to beat their argument, because they're going to say that your reliance on definitional interpretations of space that excludes their experiential perspective is the thing that allows for deep space exploration on their bodies.
Okay.
So you being like, if they're women debaters and they're like, this is what space means, and you're like, no, actually space means this way. This is like a form of linguistic violence. I'm not going to go so far as to say the R word in there, but it's the form of linguistic assault by which you get to determine the reality for me. So I asked for it because I've participated in the debate. I asked for a debate about competing interpretations and stuff like that. I may or may not have thought through that a little bit.
Oh, he thought through that argument all right, and in doing so, sexually assaulted me, because to think through an argument is to penetrate an argument, and to penetrate without my consent is, well, you can see that it's very easy to do what he's doing. It takes no intellectual rigor or argumentative substance. It's just manipulation of words. It's sophistry. Now, in this next clip, we were supposed to read our plans for the space topic, and then cross-examine each other and try to find flaws in the cases, when these two black students stand up and read their speech, which is to send all white people to space.
Little black boys are getting shot at, but whiteys will go to Mars. Black families from coast to coast didn't eat today, but whiteys will enjoy their 3-course meals in their spaceships. Black bodies are depleted on the killing fields, and whiteys run it. We affirm putting an end to the killing fields. Black bodies are done with it. Thus, all whiteys should be sent on the one-way trip to continue their deep space exploration and find a new home. Black bodies will keep Earth. This is our way of destroying the killing fields that whiteness has ruled upon. If there are no whiteys on Earth, there is no killing field. All we have done is imagine what a better life was like, and that life is one without the whiteys ruling over black bodies, and that life, a better life exists where black bodies will flourish on Earth. The creators of capital will be MIA, meaning black people can live for and provide structures for their communities without working in white-centered institutions. While whites explore deep space that is based on definitions of capital and of whiteness, we will be able to explore and have control over our spaces, something that is taken away from us on the killing fields. And whiteys, don't worry about your return flight, because we book you a one-way ticket, and while on your voyage into deep space, you won't have to worry about us, because we gonna be all right. Black bones and black britches, not brittle but stiffened. Removed are the cancers that bore caverns in calcium. Our macrophages merged with the cells of our bones to build stronger and create a space reminiscent of a new home. Make a wish on a star, not a star but a ship, carrying away all the whiteness. I told you it could fit. Over.
So now's the time when my classmates are supposed to point out flaws in what was just now read. What do you think they say? Do they point out how racist and terrible this plan is? No. Instead, their concern is, if we send white people to space, how do we know they're not going to colonize aliens?
So what happens if/when the white people find a planet with life on it? Are they just going to colonize it? Should we subject other people to that colonization?
Because white people, well, we don't know if it's people that they would be calling, first of all, because we don't know what life
Should we subject
exists.
other life to that type of colonization that is happening? White people would colonize another planet.
Okay, but black people shouldn't be subject to it either, so I'm gonna say they can live.
Now here are the questions that I ask.
What's a killing field?
Yeah, so that's in like our duty evidence. can be explained like analytically, but like it's the aftermath of slavery. It's how black people
Basically,
are
the world as we know it right now.
right.
What about the world?
Yeah. So
Literally,
right now, people.
everything. Earth.
Sorry, what?
Literally Earth, like everything.
Yeah. So what about today is a killing field?
Literally.
So one example is like the white gaze. Now, even though like black people aren't enslaved anymore, there's still this like way that black people act in like insecurity because they're being watched by whiteness. That if they
How are they
act a
being-
certain way, they can't participate in certain institutions. That when they're alone, they still feel as though whiteness is encroaching on the possibilities of like getting to those caverns, to those pieces of our personalities that are bored whole by whiteness.
Okay.
That's what the affirmative is trying to explore and how we like eradicate the white gaze, which means we kind of exit the killing fields, but also send the killing fields on its way because whiteness is what creates the killing fields on Earth.
Could you give me an example of like the white gaze or like how black people are, I guess, held to these standards that are racist?
Sure, yeah, you can. So I give you an example. I don't know why this controls it. So for example, if you're going to an interview, like if I was going to an interview, I'd be worried that I need to look white, even though nobody's like telling me I need to. But I still do because there's this project of whiteness that is against me, and to succeed, I have to conform to it.
So-
which is
more,
inherently
more
wrong.
I guess I'm confused by that
Yeah.
answer.
Just another easy example is just driving down the street, looking in your rearview mirror, even though you've done nothing wrong, and the police
Right.
is behind you and just like freaking out, even though we've literally done nothing.
So I guess I'm confused by the answer because in the beginning of your answer you said no one's actually thinking that. It's just in your head. You are afraid.
Right, because whiteness has developed these type of plaques in the personality and the psyche of black people that has created a type of psychological violence that is like the main impact of any debate that I could have in my life, because it is the one like factor that disadvantages me every day.
Last question.
What about colonialism, like, I don't know, imperialism, capitalism, all the harms you listed?
Okay.
What about those are inherently tied to whiteness or being white?
Right. So again, you can look at the Judy evidence that capital is constructed from whiteness from the first.
Yeah,
thing
what's
that white
what's the
people said.
warrant for that? Because like there's
Right.
other races that engage in capitalism, like
Right.
other
they
nations that are.
engage in a white structure.
What about it makes it white?
Right, is that they use like bodies as capital.
What
like,
about that as
labor,
white?
Because we assign labor to bodies that are priceless. Like they're not worth one thing, but we say you're worth $15 an hour.
Why is that a
You're
white
worth-
thing?
Because
Racial capitalism.
Why is capitalism white?
Racial capitalism.
racial capitalism.
What is that?
That means that whiteness has prescribed a value to black bodies even though they are priceless.
What's the warrant for that?
That there's this indiscriminate type of group text violence that white people said, oh, black people are less than us. That group text violence cannot be explained, and that is what created
Right.
whiteness.
Do all
in
white
the
people do that?
Yes.
Well, they all
All white people
They
say that
all-
I'm worth more than black people?
They all function. They are. So even if you say that you don't
That was
function,
a closed question.
Yes.
Closed answer.
yes,
Okay, what about a white person who doesn't think that way?
then
They
you
don't exist
benefit.
based on
They
the
don't
previous
exist?
question.
Yeah, it
Okay.
doesn't exist, and you
It's
would
fine.
benefit.
Okay, so what about me? I'm white. I don't think I'm better than someone on the merit of my race.
Right.
Do
But
I
you
not
benefit,
exist?
You benefit from the ideology of other white people, and you have the privilege. Like even if you say you don't exercise it, you have the type of white privilege that allows you
Is
to
it my
interact with
turn yet?
structures.
Awesome, great, because I would like to give us some suggestions that will resolve most of this thing.
Now, my professor goes on to tell them that the biggest flaw in their case is issues of practicality, which is how are we going to get white people to space? That's the issue. Not the fact that we're getting rid of all white people, but how are we going to do it? And he also suggests that they shouldn't answer questions from white students.
Yeah, the 1AC is lit, for the most part. We gotta make some edits. The biggest thing though is that the explanation of this affirmative is going to fall prey to questions about practicality. Like, how are we getting white people to space? You even allowing white people to question you about a future by which you said that they are no longer included in. Why don't all black people, since what you're talking about, whiteness and blackness are global ontological phenomena to some extent, right? Why don't they go to space and leave white people here?
Well, it's just I kind of aligned with the idea better of that if we help create the world, then we ought to stay here because what's really corrupting it is whiteness, and that leaves with white people.
Right, but isn't our labor here has not been for us. We've been laboring on behalf of other concerns. So while it's been our labor, it's not been our product. So why would we want it? So why wouldn't we leave?
don't know. I
Which
guess-
also resolves the claim about colonialism, right?
Okay,
White people
right.
should stay, they shouldn't go nowhere because they will start to become settlers, quite literally. And we understand that that produces neocolonialism. Why wouldn't we then go?
I think the biggest question was just that, like what I was trying to outline is that, there is evidence that, like people are planning to leave, and so it's like they already have the tools to leave, so we should
Right.
just let them.
And so the affirmative would stop them from leaving, and we would go.
We would leave.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think it makes sense the other way around.
Oh. I don't know then.
I mean, I understand your argument about like we produce the world, therefore it's ours.
Right.
But
I
you
want
also
to be,
don't want to
ours
give
for the
them
colonial.
like free reign to do it to someone else, right? Because
Right.
it's just a
And really, I don't think that we would be planned enough to go to somewhere with that had life, but that's besides the point. But yeah, I can see that. So it'd be-
Afrofuturism. That's my biggest thing. Afrofuturism as a pedagogy, as performance, as action throughout the debate. The cross-ex got real. What's the affirmative and the plan? And we started as like a plan text to send white people to space, and then now we're answering all these questions about practicality, who would stay, who would go. I don't know why white people get to question you on that subject anyway.
How would that play out?
How would what
Like
play out?
not letting someone question you because they're white.
I mean, I didn't say you couldn't question me, you just might not get the answers you want.
Like I'm not going to answer you, or what do you mean?
Like, I don't know why you're asking. What's your intention for asking?
Like if I'm assigned to debate you, I'm supposed
You
to
were
ask you
assigned
questions.
debate me,
Yeah.
right, but you're still also assigned a particular identity, which I'm questioning
Yeah.
in regard to your question.
So I can't ask you a question because I'm
You
white.
were asking several questions, and I'm
Right,
answering
but you're
them
saying you
all.
wouldn't answer them because of
I'm
my
answering
identity.
them all.
You're
I've
answering my
answered
question
every
about your
you've
question.
asked. I've answered every question you asked. You
Yeah,
are
you
not
have.
satisfied. You have not been satisfied.
You were
with
saying
the
that you were going to, you were wondering why he answered the question.
Sir.
I just don't understand how none of you see how incredibly racist the plan is to send an entire group of race to space. Because you're white, go to space. That's incredibly racist. That's
On
the
what basis?
definition.
How it goes further than the
On
epidermis.
what basis?
No, he didn't. He said if you're white, you go to space.
Yeah,
Just having skin
sure.
color being, that's by definition racism.
What makes you think
How
that
so?
black
Like,
people
I just
have
don't
social
understand. I think
power
that you're like
to actually
racism.
be racist towards white people?
And why
Because
would you go to space? It's
Your
because
skin
you want
color
to be
doesn't
part of
determine the level of
structure
your
that you
power.
privilege.
That's a.
But it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
There are people who are.
Society.
There are
Yeah.
certain theories,
So
academic
every
theories,
single-
Mike, that just disagree with you.
Every single white
Including
person.
Ronald
then.
Judy, including the field of Afro-pessimism and Black studies and
So,
queer
so,
theory. and
so
disability
Barack
studies.
Obama didn't have power.
Okay.
He couldn't do anything.
I mean,
He didn't
but
have any
also
power.
had to show his birth certificate when no other president
Sure, yeah,
had to.
everyone faces oppression. Everyone.
No, but that particular oppression can be marked by your skin color, which is something you
Yeah.
could probably not fathom by
No,
not
no,
being
no.
black.
I'm in a debate space where everyone questions me on my skin color. I can definitely fathom
Okay,
it.
but you're not being questioned on having black skin color. So you can't just discount
Not
other
every,
people's experiences
not
in
every
that
black
regard.
person is questioned on that. There are plenty of people who are not racist, who are white people who do not do that. It's actually a very
understand.
small
That still
minority of
doesn't mean
people.
That you don't benefit from a legacy, a history, a structure of racism.
Some people do.
And what we're talking about here, and what their their affirmative is about, it's not really about racism, which deals more with the domestic American thing. What they're talking about is anti-blackness and how the world is structured.
Yeah.
It's an ontological.
My problem is with the claim that all white people are inherently anti-black. I'm not anti-black. I have no problem with black people.
I mean, I guess your forcefulness in the claim I'm not anti-black will come off as anti-black.
Okay, that you accuse me of being anti-black, and I say, well, I'm not anti-black. You say, well, that's
Because you
proof
don't
you're
even
anti-black.
think that you can participate in power
Well, it's
structures
just,
that
what
can
is,
be oppressive
what's
to
the
other
warrant
people.
for me being anti-black? What do I do to oppress black people?
Well, one, I don't think you understand how race operates, not just as a physical epidermal thing, but
Right.
as a structuring principle for the world. Why black people get paid less, they live in worse conditions. We were not, per Dred Scott in this very country, we were never supposed
Yeah,
to even inherit.
I understand that
rights.
slavery was a thing and that some white people did some very bad things.
You're now talking about slavery, which is another thing that you can add to the list, which I have
Yeah.
not spoken about just yet.
Well, yeah, there's been plenty of acts of racism. Why
Those
does...
things, and you trying to separate them into individual acts
Yeah.
is what anti-blackness seeks to do.
Another-
Another draw the connection of all of
Yeah.
those minor instances to show
Yeah,
that there's
I'm
a
saying-
system in the world that works against black people.
Right, why am...
What's the issue?
If one person, one white person, says something racist to a black person, why am I guilty of that? Why do you treat me as if I did
What
that?
does that have to do with your complaint about the affirmative?
Well, because he's saying that all white people are inherently colonialistic and racist, and so they need to
They
go.
all benefit from that, absolutely.
Okay, can you give me an example of that? Like,
Yes.
I don't understand
I
why.
gave you several examples: housing, health.
So every single white person,
quality of life.
every
Yes,
single white person
yes.
has more power than every single black person.
You're saying words like power. I'm talking about resources and distribution.
Okay, so
and
every
stuff like
black person has less resources than every white person? What about the poor white people in South Africa who are having their property taken away? Or what about white trash people? I don't want to use that language, but
What
like,
are you talking about? South Africa.
like
I don't
in
know
different
how you highlight
countries.
South Africa and then don't talk about Cameroon.
What I'm saying,
What-
what do you mean?
right.
What do you mean?
You want to highlight poor
Yeah.
black people, poor
Yeah.
white people.
Everyone's
in
oppressed.
South
There are-
Africa,
there are poor
right?
black
And
people
that
and there's
proves
poor white
my
people.
point and
Yeah.
their point about how race is something that has been globalized because now there is race associated with people from South Africa.
What do you mean
Do
about
you
that?
understand what I'm saying?
No.
That you have separated their cultural heritage from them because of their race.
How am I separating cultural heritage?
I'm not about to keep answering these questions. Do you have a question about the half? Do you have a suggestion? It's not your half.
No, the cross-sex is over.
Awesome, great. Moving on.
Now, I'm not denying that racism is a thing that happens and that some blacks are disadvantaged because of it, or that some whites are advantaged because of it. My issue is with the claim that is embedded within the term white privilege, that all white people have privilege, that simply having white skin means that you have power or resources more so than someone who is black. Oppression isn't something that you can determine based off of skin color alone. There are so many other factors. I mean, even in this situation on the debate team, I'm white, but do I have an advantage in the team when I have a professor who hates white people? Clearly not. They know nothing about me. They don't know what I've been through or what opportunities I've had or haven't had. There are plenty of white people who have had extremely hard lives and have never benefited from their skin color. And there are plenty of black people who have had extremely privileged lives and have never had to face racism, who are born into wealthy families. The biggest disadvantage facing these communities is victim mentality. The fear of racism has become more debilitating than racism itself. The white gaze, for instance, the feeling that you have to act white because there is a system of racism that is against you, that's watching you. Even though they admit no one's actually telling them to do this, it's just a fear that they have. And this fear isn't coming from racist America or whiteness. It's coming from the professors who are pushing this narrative on them. I mean, it's no wonder that so many students are terrified and feel victimized when everyone who claims to be their ally or advocate is constantly telling them that the entire world is out to get them. I mean, the majority of people who make these claims that black people have to deal with being followed around in convenience stores or being stopped unjustly by police officers have never actually experienced any of this. It's just a narrative that they've subscribed to because they've been told that that's what's happening. In reality, we've made major strides in moving past racism as a society, but according to professors like this, everything that happens to black people is bad, and there's nothing they can do about it except be permanent victims. In fact, here's a clip of him promoting the idea that it's bad to present yourself as someone who can overcome trials and persevere and be resilient.
If I present myself as a resilient subject, a subject that cannot be broken by external forces, then when I die, or if I die, everyone else would be seen as less than I. If you act like you can do it all, and that you're just good in the world, those who are hurting, those who are suffering, you're simultaneously condescending on.
Okay.
Because you say that they're hurt and that they're suffering. Not, you even go so far to say not only is it unreal, but if it's real, they make more of a deal about it than they should. But also, if and when something happens to the resilient subject, that death is not understood as part of a structural analysis. So, for instance, if I present myself as a resilient subject, say for instance, I died because of lung cancer, people will be like, oh, he didn't die because he was black, he died because he had lung cancer. Well, it doesn't recognize the way in which black people get misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all, or have worse forms of health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. It prevents the structural analysis that can better understand the violence that happens to that body.
When I later brought up the philosophy of Stoicism, which is the idea that you should be the best you that you can be in every situation, regardless of circumstance, because you can't control your circumstance, the professor told me that I was only able to do this because I'm white and haven't been raped.
I think that Stoicism's a good philosophy independent of like my problems with identity politics. Like, it's not just like race and stuff. It's like anything, you know.
It can be a good theory until it's applied in context, which is why
Well,
I've been talking about examples.
That's why I like it, because I apply it. Like, when I'm upset, I just think about it, and then I'm not upset anymore. Like, I guess I'd have
You
to
been
like.
raped? You black? You
I've been
mental
through
disabilities?
like, you know, I've been through trials that everyone's been through trials. You know, I've been through trials that would make me upset, and I can use stoicism to not be upset about it. You know, it's like I don't think it has to be an oppression Olympics. You know, like, or we can even talk about the main Stoic figure. One of the main, Epictetus. He was a slave.
More white people.
Well, he was white, but he was a slave. I don't think his skin color changed the fact that he was a.
We should aspire
His
to-
master, like,
we
broke
should
his
aspire
leg.
to have the mental capacity of our white
No,
counterparts.
of
I
an-
completely understand.
we should as-
Sorry that my people are.
Why does it matter that he was white? He had a terrible circumstance.
Okay.
Yeah. So like he was a slave. His master broke in his leg just for torture, and he still, you know, wrote tons of
Right,
dialogues
I should
about.
aspire to that. I should aspire to
Well, yeah.
his slavehood.
No,
and
not the
his
slavehood, but the way he
mental capacity.
reacted to it.
I understand.
No, they could take everything from him except for
From
the way
somebody
he
who's been
reacted.
in the game for 10 years, that's not going to get voted on. It's just not going to get voted on. The way that you've explained it like that.
Now, the most likely excuse that the professor will use for doing this is that it's a debate team, and so he's just teaching debate. But that's not a valid defense because he's not teaching debate, he's teaching ideology. First, debate isn't about merely presenting ideas. It's about evaluating those ideas, the premises and conclusions, the logical consistency, determining if that idea is valid or not. But he doesn't care about that. He's more interested in sophistry and deconstruction for the sake of deconstruction. He'll even go so far as to completely misrepresent a basic principle of debate, like the burden of proof and presumption, when he claims that lack of proof for space means that space does not exist. Now, either he didn't understand that this was fallacious, or he did understand and intentionally misrepresented it. In either scenario, he's unfit to be teaching debate. In fact, here's him promoting the idea that debate itself is bad.
The debate is bad. Democratic deliberation is bad. Civil discourse is bad. We should not give the students opportunity to share their views, perspectives, and opinions in the academy because the academy is bad. There's also some more specific stuff in here about why debate is bad. It's harder for sexual assaulters, for racial bigots, for misogyny, for anti-trans, anti-black, anti-all difference in the world, and so therefore we should bring it to an ultimate close.
Second, the fact that almost all of the arguments he presents follow the same vein of cultural Marxism, and that any attempt to dissent or criticize those positions is immediately shot down, shows that he doesn't care about presenting both sides. There's a select range of arguments that you can pick from in the debate space, and anything that goes outside of that is immediately shot down. He even told me that he was not going to let me argue for Stoicism at debate tournaments. There's no way he would have ever let me argue that whiteness, this evil boogeyman of society, doesn't actually exist. Instead, my only option is to try to out-left my opponent. It's very clear that what's going on here is the indoctrination of students into these ideologies under the guise of a debate program. Students are joining debate, and instead of learning how to critically think and evaluate a position on its argumentative merit, they're taught to criticize everything, even if the criticism isn't valid. They're taught to cry racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia anytime someone disagrees with them, and play the victim. Not only should he not be teaching debate, but he shouldn't be teaching period. He gets extremely angry and vulgar anytime anyone disagrees with him. In the next clip, for example, when he's cross-examining me on my case for the space topic, which was just that we need to colonize Mars so that humanity has a backup plan in case something happens to Earth, when he's cross-examining me on that, he just yells and swears at me anytime I clarify my position.
And the card does not assume a world
Yeah.
in which it's not just American policy, it's American policy backed by cooperation with another country. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what the sovereignty
I
is.
think the principle of the card would apply to our plan as well, because if they're afraid of the United States getting better, I think they'd also be afraid of the United States and Russia.
That's a big leap.
I don't think
not
that's a big leap.
substantiated. You know what?
But it says global dominance.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions that I can answer, not you?
What?
Any other questions that I can answer and not you? Because you seem to have them all.
Well, you were asking me questions.
I wasn't. I was giving you a piece of advice and you disagreed with it. So,
Okay.
you got it. I can't coach you, so. Uncoachable debaters will not travel. Promise you that.
I don't know what I'm doing to be uncoachable.
I just gave you a piece of advice and told you it wasn't going to work, and you was like, I disagree.
I was trying to explain the card more.
And I'm telling you that the card is ass. compared to what your AF is supposed to be. It's not a card for your AF.
Okay.
What more do I need to say on that? The card does not say anything about cooperation with Russia. Does it?
No.
Right. So who gives a fuck about China?
Well, we were trying to get access to China solvency as well.
You're not getting access to it. You're just you're reading a piece of evidence that says China will be more pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
How's that access?
Because then they're going to try and compete with us.
That's not good for you
No, it
because
is
your
good.
app is about saving all of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, so if
Not
we-
competing with other nations.
well, so if China competes with us, then that means they also try to get to space.
No, it doesn't. It means that they try to get themselves to space
Yeah.
and not the
Well,
humanity.
they're humans
which is
as
what
well.
your evidence is about.
They're humans as well, though.
You know what? All right, you got it.
Well, that's just what the argument I'm trying to make.
If you're gonna read a hedge app, then read a fucking hedge app. If you're gonna read an app that's about humanity, then you need to be about humanity and quit trying to create competition with other nations. That doesn't solve humanity. Which is what your harms card is about, regardless of what you intended for it to be about. If you read the evidence and not your powered ass tags, that's what it says. That everybody's on Earth gonna fucking die from extinction. Not that we need to diversify ourselves.
Well, no,
We
it's
have to get off the fucking planet, is what the evidence suggests.
yeah, it says in that card that we need to be.
Right, that means not just diversify. Your argument was that we don't leave the Earth, which does not solve your evidence.
Interplanetary implies that we're on multiple planets, not
Right, but
leaving.
not the U.S. because of the violence that's going to happen to the U.S. Asteroids, global warming. Nobody's going to be able to live here. Nobody. Right?
Do you want my answer? Because I don't want you to get angry at me because I'm disagreeing with you.
Okay. I don't, actually.
Okay.
Now, I've since quit the team and dropped the class because the professor told me that if I didn't change my arguments, he wasn't going to let me compete. And at that point, it's not worth my time.
The final, last two lines kind of show that they're not saying it's going to happen, but these are looming threats that mean we should just have a backup plan. One planet could be struck by a disaster, the others would remain. So it's not necessarily saying this is going to happen. The affirmative's trying to argue that it might happen, and that warrants diversification. In the next two card,
Something might happen.
yeah.
It's not going to serve you all well on an impact level.
I think we actually argue that really well with the Sandberg and Bostrom card. Or, sorry, not that, the Bostrom 13 card. I understand that that's kind of like an unexpected argument, when we're actually,
It's
no,
not
it's
unexpected, and I'm not stupid. And I'm tired of debating this with you. If you don't agree, then we don't have to go. That's kind of where I'm at with this. Because we've been beating the same horse over and over.
I just haven't gotten a reason why I can't argue that.
Well, the reason now, I've explained it several times before in detail, the reason now is because I said so. That's the reason now. If you didn't understand the academic reasons I've given you. The evidence does not support your brainchild.
Right. You tell me the evidence.
The AF
Yeah.
is going to get destroyed by negative arguments that will say global warming's coming and the world will die. Not that it might. Warming is runaway. There's no chance. Interplanetary diversification does not resolve the ethical violation of killing people on Earth. The counterplan would get everybody to space. Not leave some.
Why can't the affirmative do that, though? We don't necessarily say we're leaving anyone here. We theoretically
That was
could
just your
do.
rationale with this last piece of this last two lines. The importance of mankind becoming an interplanetary species. One planet could be struck by disasters, the other would remain, which means that mankind could survive.
Yeah.
They will say that that's unethical.
Well, if it was predictable, obviously we'd get people off the Earth. That's more like if just randomly an asteroid hit us and we couldn't predict. Obviously, if we knew that global warming is going to kill us,
This AF cannot be built off probability. Because the probability you should be arguing is absolutely certain because these things are happening.
the Bostrom card's about 1%. A mere 1/1,000,000 of 1% is at least 100 times the value of 1,000,000 human lives.
Right, but it gives the link. The loss resulting from an existential catastrophe is so enormous that the objective of reducing existential risk will be dominant consideration whenever we act.
Yeah, no matter how small the risk is.
Existential, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're saying the risk is extremely small, but it's still enough to warrant an affirmative. We're just making an existential argument that if we don't resolve extinction, there's no purpose in doing anything else.
There's no extinction if we're living on both planets because it could happen.
Yeah, that's the goal. We don't want extinction. We want to be on both planets.
That's not what your evidence is supporting. I'm not gonna keep going back and forth through this because I'm tired of arguing with you because I've debated. I have championships.
I
You don't.
understand that.
And so you either will respect my suggestions, or we just can call it quits. And I'm super tired of it, dude. Super tired of it. Like, so fatigued about
you
it.
tell me, here's what's wrong with your case, and I say, well, here's why I disagree, and you say, I'm the coach, and you get angry.
No, I'm just saying, you can believe whichever you want to believe. I'm not here to change your opinions. But the things to get clearance from me requires me agreeing with your arguments to some degree. That it's logical. And what you're saying right now is not logical. It's not
I'm
gonna work out in
arguing
a
why
debate.
it's logical.
Fine. Okay, cool.
Could I give you an analogy I think might help
No,
you understand?
it's not going to help me understand.
You haven't heard it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to understand more. I got this F down pretty great.
Well, I don't think you do, though, because the analogy...
Sweet.
Okay.
What do you want me to do?
Well, I'm just trying to
don't
help you
coach
understand.
me.
Now I
I
understand
coach you.
that. Yeah.
So quick.
Does that mean I have
me.
to just listen to anything you say?
You might want to take heed to that. You don't have to. You don't have to. But there's consequences for you not doing so. I mean,
and I
just
get
show you this
everybody.
affirmative
If I
because
get
of
everybody,
this 1% risk thing.
What DA?
Any of them.
Could you just give me an
No.
example?
How
do you expect me to
Are
listen
you going
to
to
you?
change the app or not?
How do you expect me to
Do
listen
you
to
want to change the app or not?
Obviously, I don't want to.
Well, then we're going to call it quits then. We've been having the same fucking debate for a week, and I'm tired of debating you.
Okay.
You're a child as far as I'm concerned. I don't need to debate you.
It's like if you.
I'm not doing it.
Well, I'm just saying.
I'm not doing it. Can you
Do
send the
what you
next
want.
people in here?
I'm
please?
letting you know
I
that
need the next people in here. What do you need to let me know?
I'm letting you know that if I'm going to be going to these tournaments and putting in all this effort, I don't think it's fair for me to just not be able to argue what I want to argue and
You
not
don't
have
get to
a
argue
reason.
everything you want to argue because you can sign up on your own accord.
Now, I reported all this to the department that this professor teaches in and was essentially told that they can't do anything, that they were going to try to talk to the dean, but it's been over a month and I still haven't heard back from them. They instead directed me to the affirmative action program at our university, and those meetings have been equally unpromising, if you can imagine. They've been maintaining the position that this professor has the right to teach whatever he wants to teach in this class, and that the only thing they think I might have a case with is when he told the other students not to answer questions from me because I'm white. But there's so much more that's going on here that shouldn't be. This professor should not be teaching, let alone teaching debate.